Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a great day so far and welcome to today's video, which is going to be my top 10 foundations ranked. Finally, I've got my thoughts together. I've processed, I've gone back and forth, wearing this one, wearing that one, wearing this one, back and forth for days and days and weeks on end. And I finally have what I feel is a pretty solid ranking of these top 10. It's not easy for me, okay? It's not easy for me to rank foundations. I take a long time to process which do I like more, which do I like the most, in which different situations. It's taken forever. But I feel now we've got to a place where I'm confident in my choices and I'm ready to share them with you. Having said that, we should still take slightly with a pinch of salt this order of these foundations. These are my top 10 and looking at them in front of me, I love all of these foundations. I think every one of these foundations is a fantastic, great foundation. And there are circumstances where I'd reach for each of these, certainly the top 5, more so than any of the others. It just depends on the type of day, what I'm going to be doing, what the weather's doing, how long I'm going to be wanting my makeup to look perfect for, and all of those types of things. I feel like a lot of these foundations, they serve different purposes better and they have pros and cons against each other. So while I've put them into an order that I feel like this is how much I love them, there are circumstances where they move around, but this is kind of the best that it can be as far as a solid ranking. But it's not this ranking every single day of my life. Sometimes things do move around, so take everything with a little pinch of salt, if you will. But without further ado, let's get started with 10th place. And this is the Tom Ford Soft Matte Foundation. Now, there are a couple of other foundations in this top 10 that aren't dewy, glowy, luminous, but this is the only foundation I would say that has the word matte in the name, in the description, in any way, shape or form. Yes, it is definitely what you may call a soft modern matte. So it isn't completely flat matte. It's not a sort of Estee Lauder double wear. It's not really a flat matte foundation. It is a soft matte, a more modern matte, which is the typical phrase that people use to refer to this type of finish. So for that reason, that's why it's in 10th place. Till very recently, this was like my go-to evening foundation, the one that I would reach for if I was going for dinner or drinks or something like that where there might be flash photography, because I just find slightly less glowy foundations and foundations with no SPF in it are my go-to for evenings, just in case of flash photography, bounce back, things like that can look much more flattering on a matte foundation than they will on a dewy foundation, just because everything's going to look more glowy and shiny potentially under a flash. So this is an absolute reliable workhorse for me. If I was going out and I was worried about a really long day where maybe it's really hot and I'm going to be out in day into the evening, this would probably be the one that I would reach for. It wears very well. It's very flattering and smooth. It looks very, very nice on camera because it is a more matte foundation, which does tend to look better on camera than it does in real life versus a luminous glowy foundation. Has a beautiful medium to full coverage, but still looks very natural and feels very light. It also has, being Tom Ford, a great shade range for me. The undertones are perfect in both winter and summer, and I just really, really like this foundation. As far as matte foundations go, it's my favorite of the bunch. But it can't really be any higher because it is too matte to be any higher. Next up, much more up my typical street when it comes to foundations, is the Estee Lauder Futurist Hydra Rescue Foundation. This is, as you guys know, my typical preference when it comes to foundation. It's a medium coverage. It's a luminous, glowy finish. It's very natural on the skin. It does have a high SPF 45 in here, but it does give me that fresh, plump, juicy skin of which I seek. I just constantly seek it. I seek it high. I seek it low. I seek it wherever I go. And this does give me all of that. It wears nicely, not amazingly long wearing. It's not like transfer proof, being a very glowy luminous foundation, but I care not about that the vast majority of the time. This wears long enough for me. I don't worry so much about transfer. It's not such a big deal for me in my lifestyle and the things that concern me. That's not high up there. But the issue I have with this, why it's a bit lower than a lot of foundations that are similar to this in lots of ways, as I've said 100 times, this does not look good on my forehead. It doesn't flatter my lines there. It does beautifully on like my mouth area, my top lip, my chin, other areas where there are lines and texture. But on my forehead lines, this just sits in them. It kind of makes them more exaggerated versus a lot of these other foundations. Not terribly, but a lot of the foundations that come above it actually improve the lines on my forehead and kind of smooth them and perfect that area, and this one kind of does the opposite a little for me. So that's why it's slightly lower. The finish is glorious, the coverage is gorgeous, but it lets me down on the forehead. And now in 8th place, we have the Clé de Peau Radiant Cream Foundation. Now this is a higher coverage foundation than a lot of the others that I've talked about versus the Estee Lauder. It definitely has like a more full coverage straight out the gate. It is a thicker formula, being a cream foundation. It has the SPF 25, but you also do get a very small fill in this one. So this is a 21ml fill, and this is a very expensive foundation. A few of the reasons why it's a little bit lower down: one, because I get half the amount in this that I do in some of these others, and two, because of that crazy high price, and just I'm not a big fan of this packaging either. When you compare this to some of the more luxurious glass bottles I'm going to speak about, those are some of the drawbacks for me. The price, the packaging, and the fill amount are all just not what I want them to be. It is also a lot higher coverage than I typically lean towards. My preference is like a medium coverage in a foundation that stays very natural and I can still see skin through and it still looks like me but better. That's kind of what I'm going for. This is definitely like a high coverage, small amount, high coverage, much more perfected makeup look to it, which sometimes, don't get me wrong, I'm in the mood for that. I'll go for a full beat, full glam, and that's what I like. This gives me the full beat, full glam luminosity, but most of the time I reach for a more natural and more medium coverage. So that's why this is a little lower. There's a few things that just knock it down a few pegs, but it is a very flawless, very smooth, perfected, luminous foundation that does wear decently but not amazingly. I'd say this is like a 6-ish hour wear. If you set it, it will wear beautifully, but as you know, I don't really love setting foundations. But if you set this, it will be easily 8 hours and longer, but otherwise it's going to be more like 6 to 8 before it starts to break down. So that's just something, again, that kind of counts against it versus some of the others that are a bit higher. In 7th place, we have the Shiseido Radiant Lifting Foundation. This is such a beautiful foundation, a little similar to the Clé de Peau Cream, about a third of the price. It is more full coverage, again, much like the cream. It's much more full coverage than, say, the Estee Lauder and some of the others that we're going to be talking about higher up the ranking. It is typically a full coverage. Yes, you could probably get a medium out of it if you use a very small amount with a sponge, but if you're going to go in with this and a brush, you're getting full coverage straight away. And it, again, it has that more made up, full beat, full glam look that sometimes, again, I'm here for it. The vast majority of my everyday life, I want a little less, a little more natural of a foundation. So this is a bit too high coverage to rank higher. I like a more medium to full medium foundation. This is like full beat, full glam, but a gorgeous look on the skin. Shiseido has great undertones for me, perfect olive undertones, summer and in winter, which I really appreciate. always have a great shade in Shiseido, which makes a big difference to how I feel about a foundation. Again, this has SPF 30 in it, but it does wear really nicely. And I think the reason being that when I first apply this, it's more of a satin finish and it gets a little more radiant throughout the day. I always apply this and I think, it's just not quite as glowy as I want it to be, and give it a few hours and then the glow, like as it melts into the skin, it gets more and more beautiful throughout the day. And then I'll sort of catch a glimpse of it in the mirror, or I'll go to the bathroom and I'll see how my makeup's doing in the mirror and think, wow, now I'm loving what I see, because it definitely kind of gets a little glowier throughout the day and I end up loving it. But when I first apply it, it's just not quite as glowy. So that's just something that I've noticed about this one. But it does look very perfected, very smooth. It does wear really nicely. It doesn't need setting. And although not like transfer proof, again, it is a more luminous, glowy foundation, hard for that to not transfer at all, but it certainly isn't one that is moving around or like you're going to get it on everything if you touch your face or anything like that. So it's kind of in the middle as far as how kind of bulletproof it is. It does wear beautifully, like I said, it doesn't need to be set and is a gorgeous, slightly more affordable than a lot of these other foundations option. In sixth place, some of you may be slightly surprised that this one isn't higher, but this is the Lisa Eldridge Seamless Skin Foundation. Now this is a stunning foundation, but it's definitely not a glowy, luminous or dewy finish. It's much more of a natural satin finish, or even leaning just more natural than satin. So it definitely doesn't have enough glow for it to be higher in the ranking. And that's why maybe you guys might be surprised, because you know I do love this foundation, and I do. Sixth place on this list is not slacking, okay? That is a very good foundation. It's high up on my ranking. I try a lot of foundations and I think this is a beautiful one. And this is the highest ranked foundation on my list, my lifetime list, that is not glowy in some way, shape or form. It's not got a really lovely glow or luminosity to the skin. It's definitely a more natural skin-like finish, which is exactly what the foundation claims to be and is designed to do. Now, this is definitely one that I would reach for on what is going to be a very long, arduous day for a foundation, a hot day. It wears so beautifully. It has no SPF. This foundation looks incredible on camera. It photographs beautifully. It's gorgeous, perfect option for a bride, for a wedding day, or for a wedding guest when you may have flash photos, or you just want your foundation to last a very long time and then not to be a lot of shine or glow in your photos. It's beautiful. It's very flexible as far as coverage. You can get a light to a sort of medium to full, I would say, with this foundation. So it's very flexible. It's smooth. It's flawless. It's very, very flattering, I find, on my skin, and it doesn't transfer. It sets itself down. You don't need to set this one at all. It sets itself down. It wears beautifully, and it is like self-setting, so you don't have to worry about it throughout the day. I've worn this on some very challenging for foundation type of day, and it's never let me down. It wears beautifully, and as far as a non-glowy foundation, this is like as good as it gets. And we are now into the top 5 of my foundations, and yes, there's been some movement around here. Let me tell you, there has been some movement. There are some new entries in this top 5. And all 5 of these are loves. These are like foundations I absolutely love. There are tiny little things that kind of separate them as to how much I love them versus the others. But these are all foundations that I absolutely love and think are amazing, gorgeous foundations. So in 5th place, the Clé de Peau Radiant Fluid Foundation Natural. Whenever I talk about this foundation, I have to alert you to the fact that there is also a Radiant Fluid Foundation Matte. This is the natural finish, not the matte. I've had so many people tell me that they've purchased the matte or the Radiant Fluid Foundation Matte after my recommendation, and I'm like, no, that's the wrong one. This is the one, the Radiant Fluid Foundation Natural, that I love. It's such a beautiful foundation. Again, it has SPF 25 in it, which is slightly irritating to me and lots of people, because we just like to put our SPF on and then our foundation. We don't want them mixed together. We want maximum SPF, please. I don't want it in my foundations. But this is a 35ml fill, so a little bit more than the majority. The 30ml is kind of the classic. This gives you a 35ml fill, so a slightly more generous and a lot more generous than the cream. There's almost double in here than there is in the cream version of the foundation. So a generous fill from Clé de Peau, which we much prefer. Now this is like a more buildable foundation. So this is kind of starts as a medium and is buildable to full, which is my preference because I like to be able to keep a medium in the majority of places, but then I also like to be able to build up if I do have any sort of stubborn discoloration or redness still showing through. But this is very flexible in that way. You can start off with like a medium and you can build up to a medium full or even to full. And it just has the most beautiful, luminous, juicy, smooth, gorgeous, glowy, plumped skin finish that I absolutely live for. It wears very, very well for such a glowy foundation. I don't need to set it. It doesn't go into my lines. It doesn't transfer all over the place, and it wears very nicely without being set. It is a little more glowy than the Shiseido and has like less coverage off the bat, so it's a bit more flexible than that one. It's a similar sort of finish to the Estee Lauder, but it has a little more coverage and is more flattering and wears better. So that's kind of why this sits a bit higher than those others, just so you know how I'm kind of doing this, how I'm trying to work this out and break this down. This is definitely a higher performing as far as not being set and as far as wear time and as far as the fact that this one starts off exactly where I want it to, with that juicy, glowy, luminous skin look, like natural heaven scent skin, but it doesn't deteriorate and it doesn't sort of need to wear in. It just starts off there and it ends there, and it's just gorgeous. A beautiful foundation. In fourth place, one of the very new to me foundations has stormed right up the charts and could be in third. It's very close between third and fourth on this list. So yeah. The foundations on this list that are newer to me were much harder to place because I just don't know them as well, and I'm still kind of fully solidifying my thoughts and my feelings about them. So third and fourth are the ones that I think potentially could swap places at this point. But right now in fourth place is the Nars Light Reflecting foundation. Very, very new to me, this foundation. I was really wowed by this foundation. Nars makes amazing foundations. Like every foundation I've tried from Nars is a winner, but this is my favorite of the entire bunch. I think this is the best foundation Nars has ever put out, and I absolutely love it. This is like a medium to full buildable foundation. It is slightly less glowy than, say, the Clé de Peau Radiant Fluid foundation, and I'd say it's slightly less glowy than the Shiseido. It's maybe slightly less glowy than the Estee Lauder Futurist, but it is more glowy, significantly more so than the Lisa Eldridge. It's kind of got its own sort of category. It's like a satin luminosity is how I would describe this. I'd say the Lisa Eldridge is like a satin natural. This is like a satin luminosity. I don't know if I'm the only person who thinks of foundations in this way, but in my head, I have like a wet luminosity and I have a dry luminosity, and there's like two different varieties of luminosity. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but for me, like the Estee Lauder is like a wet luminosity, and I don't mean that it's necessarily super shiny. It's just there's this juicy, wet, like unset quality to the finish, whereas the Nars, it kind of looks like any of those foundations have had a light dusting of powder and it's a more dry luminosity. If that is helpful to anyone, who knows? Only you guys can be the judge of that. The likely guess is no. But I know what I'm talking about, at least. This gives a absolutely perfect, flawless look to the skin. I love the way my skin looks with this foundation. It's like got this dreamy, gorgeous, just perfect quality to it, but it somehow doesn't look heavy or makeup-y. It's got the coverage of, say, these two, but it just doesn't look as makeup-y. What? We're not doing keepy-uppies now. It doesn't look as makeup-y. It doesn't look as sort of heavy, full beat, full glam, like I'm wearing a lot of makeup. It somehow stays a little more natural on the skin despite being like a fuller coverage. if that makes any sense. And I think it's just that gorgeous finish. It just has enough luminosity to look natural on the skin and no SPF. Yes! Which means that you can wear this of an evening, and this is now my go-to evening foundation. This would be my choice, my first preference for a date night, for drinks, for dinner with the girls, going out, dancing, anything like that. This would be the foundation of my choice now because it wears very, very nicely. It has that slightly less glowy, shiny finish that is just going to wear a bit better and just be a bit less shiny in photos, and it is just very, very flattering. I just feel like it just gives me a perfected veil. Very, very smooth, very, very beautiful, and an absolute new favorite. Could potentially swap around with the next one and be in my top 3. So in third place, another very new foundation to me, and this is the Charlotte Tilbury Beautiful Skin Foundation. So again, this got the tube packaging, which, don't get me wrong, it has pros and cons. Like, you can get every last bit out of here a bit easier than some glass bottles, but it's just not as luxurious. I do prefer a glass bottle. It feels luxurious. I like it, okay? Now this is an interesting one for me. It has a little couple of quirks about it that I have noticed. So this is like a medium coverage. I don't think you're really going to get a full coverage out of this. It kind of starts off as like a light medium and it builds to a medium coverage. It looks very, very natural angel skin to me. This is Charlotte Tilbury skin personified in a foundation. If you watch a lot of Charlotte Tilbury tutorials, masterclasses, if you follow her socials, you know, all of the looks that her models have, this is that look in a foundation. It's so beautiful. The finish of it has the perfect, like the maximum luminosity and glow to it without looking shiny. It's just the right side of that shiny, glowy border. It's so fresh, juicy, healthy skin, very, very natural to me, but still very perfected and beautiful. And like, again, just that glossy, healthy, glowy, youthful appearance to that finish. The finish is just stunning of this foundation. It doesn't wear quite as well as some of the others, but set it will wear incredibly well for 8 hours on me. But I think unset it's more like a 7 to 8. I find this really light and skin-like, and I really like that. I think it looks very natural on the skin. The quirk to this is that when I first apply this, it sits on top of the skin, and that's what I've heard lots of people saying about this foundation, is that it sits on top of the skin, it doesn't like melt into the skin, and that I agree with. Initially that does happen to me, but every time I use this, as I'm applying it, I'm thinking, oh, do I actually like this as much as I thought? And then by the time I've kind of done my concealer maybe and like my bronzer, it just is like it works into the skin. And by the time, certainly by the time I finish my makeup, it has like transformed into the most glorious goddess skin that I have ever seen in my life. I don't know why for some people this just doesn't work, but on me, it's like after a few minutes, it just does really melt and mesh with the skin and end up looking just glorious. Whereas some people, it seems like it's just staying with that kind of on top of the skin. And I guess that's very much dependent on probably skin type and probably maybe even on like skincare and primers that you've used underneath it, I guess. But for me, it's literally by the time I finish my makeup, I just love how my skin looks with this foundation on, and it has no SPF, which I really appreciate it. I vastly prefer this to the Estee Lauder. Lots of people saying these are sort of, they look so similar and they have a lot of the similar claims, but this looks just so much better on my skin. It's so much more flattering. I much prefer it, and it doesn't have the issue of having SPF in it, which the Estee Lauder does. These two foundations are completely different. This is much glowier than the Nars. I think the Nars probably has a little more coverage to it, or can certainly build up to more coverage to it. So I find these really hard to compare because they're just not similar, but I love them both. At the moment, I've put the Charlotte Tilbury just above the Nars, but they are certainly neck and neck as far as how much I love them both. I will also say that this is one that I absolutely love set. Like when I set this, it looks gorgeous. I guess actually it probably looks quite a lot like the Nars when you set this one. So it does have that extra option if I want it to last really, really long, or I don't want it to get too glowy throughout the day, then I have that as an option. But a lot of foundations that I love, when I set them, I don't love them anywhere near as much because it just takes all of the gorgeous glow to the skin away and it just really dulls it down. Whereas the Charlotte Tilbury, I think it's so glowy that actually I don't mind it set. I still like it. I still get enough luminosity for my preferences. And now in second place, are we going to have a new #1 foundation? It's the question on everybody's lips. Maybe. So at least some of the people watching the video, I'm sure you must have wondered. But in second place, and drum roll please, is the Chanel #1 foundation. So no, there is not, sadly for some, a new #1. The Chanel #1 is my #2. Unfortunately, that would have been really convenient for it to be my #1. That would have a very nice ring to it. Chanel #1 is my #1, but it's not, it's my #2. This is a beautiful foundation, okay? It's so light on the skin. It feels like nothing. It feels so hydrating. It's very, very smooth. It's got a gorgeous glowy luminosity to it. And it just has this beautiful texture as well. As I'm applying, I just really enjoy it. And I think it looks so beautiful and natural and healthy on the skin. There are a couple of reasons why this cannot be my #1. One, it does not wear very well on me at all. I'd say this is like by 6 hours, this is getting pretty shiny. Like I need this to be set for me to wear it for any longer. For that reason, it's definitely in danger of being toppled by these two. These three, because they are still so new to me, are definitely the three that could move around. These are the three that I'd say second to fourth place are the three that might do some shuffling as I get to know them, as I sort of try them back and forth for the very long term over the next like 6 months. These could definitely jiggery pokery around. Ultimately, the appearance of this, the finish and everything and how it looks when it is on, I love. I think it's gorgeous, but a few things. One, it takes a lot of this foundation to get everything covered and evened and all my redness toned down and just looking everything like even, versus these two, it takes way less. The Nars in particular, I need like 1 to 2 pumps to get everything even and perfected and how the amount of coverage that I want. With the Chanel, I have to use a lot of this foundation, like pump, 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 to get it where I need it to be to even everything out. And then the wear, it just doesn't wear as well as probably any of the other foundations on this list. Now, I typically don't really need my foundations to wear that well. You know, I will put my foundations on, typically don't do foundation to go on the school run. I'll do my makeup after the morning school run. Then I might sit and film after I've done my makeup, and then, you know, it's like school run in the evening. I probably only really need my foundation to look good, or want it to look good, for like 5 or 6 hours. And this can certainly achieve that, but lots of people want more and want longer, and I just don't think you're going to get it out of this without setting. Certainly without setting. If I set this, then I don't love it as much, so that's the reason why it didn't topple my #1. However, I do love it. I mean, you can tell this one has more issues with it than the Nars. It has more issues with it than the Clé de Peau, for me, and how it works on my skin at least. But I just love how it looks so much that it still is as high as #2. But yes, it's not without its little issues. It's definitely not perfect. It hasn't got any SPF, which is great. I can wear it for a dinner or something like that. But I will say it's not for everybody. Even though it claims to have less scent or fragrance than most Chanel products, it still has quite a lot of fragrance. Okay. Still has quite a lot. You're going to use a lot of product. It doesn't wear that well. So there are definitely some drawbacks, but the foundation is gorgeous, beautiful, very flattering and stunning on the skin. So that is my #2. So of course you all know what my #1 is. There's no surprises here. It's still the Tom Ford Shade and Illuminate foundation. And there was a clue because this is the foundation that I'm wearing today. So, you know, if you were sneaky and checking out what I was wearing today, there was a little sneaky clue for you there. This is still my holy grail, my number one. It certainly has more competition these days. Certainly these three, the Chanel, the Nars and the Charlotte Tilbury, are pushing this one for its money these days. This one used to sit way above, head and shoulders above number 2, 3 or 4 on my list. Now it's all a little closer, but this is still ultimately my holy grail for now. It takes a long time to become my foundation holy grail, and this one has been with me for a couple of years now. This has been at the top of my foundation list. It's not just going to disappear overnight, although apparently a lot of you wish it would. A lot of you wished I preferred one of these others because this is very expensive, but to me it's just totally worth it. The packaging is just my favorite of all of these foundations. It's so beautiful, so luxurious. The undertones and the shades in this foundation are absolutely perfect for me, winter and summer. I love how thin and liquidy it is. I love how I can do just a quite thin layer and it somehow gives me like a medium coverage, as in it's covering like my redness, it's neutralizing any discoloration. Everything is even with like the thinnest little layer, but it still looks so natural. And the thing that makes this just above everything else for me is the finish. The finish is just special. It's just so beautiful and luminous and glowy, but still so natural and skin-like at the same time. It's exactly what I want. It seems to like magically blur all of my lines and wrinkles. I feel like it takes like 10 years off of my age, and it's just so flattering and gorgeous, but it wears very, very well. I have never ever set this foundation to my knowledge. Maybe I did one time, but I don't remember ever having to do it because it just doesn't need it. This will wear for an 8-hour challenging day with no issues whatsoever. I never feel the need to set it. It starts off exactly how I want my skin to look and it stays there. It doesn't get shinier and shinier throughout the day. It just stays in the sweet spot that I love. The one thing I wish I could change about it is the SPF 50 that is in here that makes it not safe for evenings. So, you know, I tend to reach more so for either the Charlotte Tilbury or the Nars for an evening foundation because this one does make me a bit nervous with the SPF in it. So I'd be more likely to sort of reach for one of these three in the evening, just in case I want to take a photo with my husband or I want to take a photo with the girls, then this one, it could be dangerous. But other than that, it is absolute perfection. But like I say, it's in danger of being bumped off now because these three don't have SPF in it. So, you know, as time goes by, it's nice to be able to have one foundation that like ticks all my boxes that I can wear for any occasion. And I think certainly these two have the potential to do that. The Chanel, I just think its wear time is going to let it down. Whereas these two, I could wear them evening, daytime, you know, for a wedding, for dinner, for a day at the soft play, and they're going to work for like any occasion. The Chanel slightly makes me nervous because I know it just doesn't wear as well on me. And I wonder how I'm going to like and get on with this one in the summer because I mean, these three, I think the Lisa Eldridge, might have come out like at the end of summer here. I can't quite remember, but these three I haven't yet tried in the summer warmer months because they came out in the winter months. So it's going to be very interesting how things develop in the next 6 months. But as it stands right now, that's my top 10. So tell me, was this order what you were expecting? Were you shook? Or were you just like, yeah, that seems about right, that's what I thought? Were there any surprises? Please let me know what your favourites are out of these foundations. Which is your number one? Have you tried any of these? And how did you get on with them? Please let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. And I'd love to see you in the next one. Otherwise, take care for now. Bye, 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 bye.